The cry came sharp against the evening quiet. Not a word, not even a name, just a sound dragged out of a child's throat. The widow rose from her chair on the porch, cloth still in her hand, and turned her head toward the wire fence. 4 children clung there, knuckles white around rusted wire, clothes torn, faces dirt-streaked. Their eyes searched the yard as if it might give them water. None of them spoke at first. Only the smallest kept sobbing, breath hitching like it hurt to keep air in. The Silent Apache stepped out from the shadow of the barn, rifle in hand, held low, not pointed. He walked steady, boots pressing dust, face unreadable. The widow's voice cracked before she even meant it. Where did they come from? The children didn't answer. Their mouths opened, but no sound. Then the tallest boy forced out a whisper. Please. Just that. Please. His fingers cut deeper into the wire. The Apache stopped 3 paces from the fence. He crouched, eyes level with the boy. The rifle barrel dipped into the dirt. He didn't say a word. He never did. The widow stepped down off the porch. You hungry? She asked. The smallest girl nodded, lips trembling. The widow looked at the Apache. What do you see? He didn't look at her. He kept his gaze on the children. They don't belong here, she said. The boy shook his head hard. We got nowhere. The widow's jaw tightened. Whose children are you? Silence. Only the sobbing again. The Apache rose to his feet. He tapped the rifle butt against the ground once. Slow. The girl whispered, almost too soft. Papa. The word slipped through the wire and hung in the air. The widow stiffened. What did you say? The girl lifted her head. Papa. She looked not at the widow, but at the Apache. The widow's hands gripped her skirt. No, she muttered. No, he's not. The Apache didn't move. His face showed nothing, but his eyes locked with the girl's. The boy spoke again. Don't send us back. Please, don't. The widow turned her head toward the road beyond the field. No riders yet, no dust trails, no sheriff. She knew it wouldn't stay that way long. Children at a stranger's fence didn't go unnoticed. Gates locked, she said. The boy's voice cracked. We can climb. The Apache finally spoke, voice rough, deep, almost like it had been buried in his chest for years. Stay. Just one word. Stay. The widow turned quick. You'll speak now? He looked at her once, then back at the children. He set his rifle against the post, hands free. He pulled the latch. The gate groaned. Don't you dare, the widow hissed. The gate swung. The children stumbled through, falling to their knees in the yard. Dust rose around them. They looked smaller up close, bones pressing against skin, eyes hollow, like wells run dry. The widow's breath shook. You've brought them inside. The Apache knelt, steady hands lifting the smallest girl to her feet. She clung to his shirt, pressing her face into his chest. The boy caught the widow's stare and held it. We ain't bad, he said. We just need a place. The widow shook her head. You don't know what you're asking. The boy's voice sharpened. Better than dying out there. The widow felt her knees weaken. She wanted to send them off, to close the gate, to wash her hands clean. But the girl still whispered Papa into the Apache's chest, and he didn't push her away. The widow whispered back more to herself. This house doesn't need more ghosts. The Apache lifted his eyes to hers. He said nothing, but she knew the weight behind it. The children stayed. Fine, she spat. Food, water, then we talk. The children followed her toward the porch, feet dragging, steps unsure. The boy kept looking back at the road, like something might come for him. The widow opened the door, motioned them in. They hesitated, 4 shadows against the wood frame. She almost told them to stop, almost shut the door in their faces. But the girl's whisper returned, soft and sharp. Papa. The widow glanced at the Apache still standing by the gate. His rifle rested against his shoulder again, calm, waiting. He gave the smallest nod, once. The widow's throat burned. Inside then. The children crossed the threshold. The boards creaked beneath them. Dust clung to their hair. The widow's hand stayed tight on the door, eyes on the empty road, waiting for the riders she knew would come. The Apache closed the gate and leaned his rifle back against the fence. He stood there for a long time, watching the horizon, silent. Inside, the widow set bread on the table. The children tore at it with shaking hands. She watched them, heart heavy, voice quiet. No names yet. Not until I know what you carry with you. The boy swallowed hard. We ain't carrying nothing. The widow's eyes narrowed. Everyone carries something. The girl looked up, crumbs on her lips. Papa, she said again. The widow closed her eyes. The word cut through her like a knife. She whispered to the room, not to anyone. This won't end clean. Outside, the Apache walked the fence line, silent as ever. The children ate until their hands slowed. The widow sat across, still as stone. The house seemed to breathe heavier, every board, every nail. The choice had been made, and the road outside stayed empty. For now, the table groaned under the weight of the silence. 4 children sat with crumbs stuck to their faces, hands still clutching the crusts as though someone might tear them away. The widow stood by the stove, arms crossed, staring too hard. She wanted to demand answers, but the words stayed caught in her throat. Names, she said finally. Her voice was steady, but her chest felt tight. Tell me your names. The boy's jaw moved. Nothing came. The smaller girl chewed her lip raw. The 2 in between wouldn't even look up. The Apache leaned against the doorway, rifle propped close by, arms folded. He didn't press them. He never did. The widow's voice cut sharper. You got names, don't you? Speak. The boy swallowed. His lips parted. No sound. The widow stepped forward, hand pressing to the table. I won't keep shadows under my roof. Say who you are. The girl beside him shifted, voice like a breath. Papa. The widow froze. The air in her lungs turned heavy. What did you say? The girl pointed to the Apache. Her finger shook, but her eyes stayed locked. Papa. The widow spun toward him. You hear that? He didn't move, didn't blink. The widow's voice rose. Say something. Silence. The boy slammed his palm flat on the table. She don't know what she's saying. The widow's eyes snapped to him. Then correct her. The boy looked down. She's scared. The widow's jaw tightened. Scared or not, words matter. The girl whispered again, softer, almost a chant. Papa, Papa. The widow's throat burned. She turned back to the Apache. Well, you gonna tell her she's wrong. His arms stayed folded. His shadow stretched across the floor. The widow's fists clenched. You don't get to stand there like stone while children call you what you ain't. The boy spoke quick, words tumbling. We don't mean no harm. He looks like, he feels. His voice cracked. He stopped. The widow slammed the table edge with her palm. Feels like what? The boy's eyes filled, but he said nothing. The widow leaned closer. Names, she hissed. If you want food in this house, you'll speak them. The older girl opened her mouth. Her voice came faint, almost broken. We forgot. The widow blinked. Forgot? The girl nodded. They told us not to. Said, don't remember. Said, don't answer if asked. The widow stepped back slow, hand trembling against her skirt. Who told you? The girl lowered her head. No answer. The widow turned to the Apache, voice low and sharp. You believe this? He finally moved, just a tilt of his head, enough to say yes. The widow's breath caught. You're siding with them? His eyes held hers, still silent. The smallest boy shifted in his chair. We can't say. Not yet. If we do. He cut off. His hands clutched the crust tighter. The widow's chest ached. If you do what? No one answered. The little girl whispered again, steady this time. Papa. The widow slammed the pan on the stove so hard it rattled. Stop saying that. The girl flinched but didn't take the word back. The widow pointed to the door. You want him? He's out there. Not in here. The boy's voice turned sharp. Don't send us out again. Please. The widow shook her head. You don't even tell me who you are. You call strangers names that don't belong. You think that makes you safe? The boy's shoulders hunched. Safe don't exist. The words hung heavy in the room. The widow's hand dropped to her side. What did they do to you? Silence again. Eyes dropped to the floorboards. The widow's voice softened, almost against her will. Someone gave you names. Mothers, fathers, somebody. Where are they now? The boy whispered. Gone. The widow swallowed. Gone where? His eyes filled again. Everywhere but here. The widow stepped back toward the stove, throat tight. She looked at the Apache. His face was carved still, eyes dark but steady. You just stand there, she muttered. Let them make you something you're not. He didn't move. The little girl slipped off her chair, padded across the floor. She stopped in front of him, small hand reaching for his coat. She looked up, eyes wide, lips trembling. "Papa." The widow's chest caved. She turned away. The Apache let the child's hand rest there. He didn't speak, didn't push her away. The widow gripped the counter, whispering to herself, "This house is cursed enough without lies." The boy's voice broke the quiet. "Then let us be ghosts here, better ghosts than dead." The widow shut her eyes. The room breathed heavy. Boards creaked. Wind pressed against the shutters. The girl's whisper lingered in the air, soft and unyielding. "Papa." The widow's hands tightened to fists. She didn't answer. She couldn't. The Apache stayed still, silent, as though the word belonged to him after all. The widow heard the hoofbeats before she saw the dust. She stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her skirt. Eyes narrowed at the road. The children pressed to the window behind her, faces half hidden in the glass. The Apache already stood in the yard, rifle leaning casual against his shoulder, his stance too still to be at ease. The sheriff rode slow, letting his horse clop heavy against the dirt like each step was a warning. He was broad, hat pulled low, badge shining even in the fading light. When he reined up at the fence, he didn't look at the widow first. His eyes went straight to the Apache. Cold, flat. "Evening," the sheriff said. The widow nodded, tight. "Evening." He tilted his head toward the house. "Heard talk of children here." The widow's jaw stiffened. "They're here." "Law says they're wards of the state," he replied. His eyes flicked toward the window where small faces disappeared quick. "Law didn't feed them," the widow said. The sheriff's mouth twitched like he wanted to laugh, but didn't. "Ain't for you to decide." The Apache stayed silent, rifle unmoved. The sheriff's eyes cut toward him again. "And you, what business you got keeping white children behind your fence?" The Apache's face didn't change. The widow stepped down one stair. "He's not the one keeping them. I am." The sheriff smirked. "Is that right?" "That's right." "Funny," he said. "I thought you had enough ghosts in that house already." The widow's hands curled against her skirt. "Don't speak of things you don't understand." "I understand plenty," the sheriff shot back. "And I understand the law. Children don't stay out here under the watch of a—" He stopped short, but his eyes flicked toward the Apache again, full of old venom. The widow cut him off, voice sharp. "Finish that, and I'll make you swallow it." The sheriff's smirk faded. "You threatening me?" "I'm stating a fact." The sheriff leaned forward in his saddle. "They don't belong to you. They belong to the county. They belong to nobody but themselves," the widow answered. The sheriff spat into the dirt. "Don't play righteous with me. You know what'll happen if word gets out? Folks will say you're harboring strays. Say you've lost your mind." The widow's eyes flashed. "Maybe I have. Maybe I lost it the day men like you stood by and did nothing." The sheriff's jaw tightened. He shifted in the saddle, trying to steady the weight of the moment. "You're digging yourself a hole, widow." The Apache stepped forward then. Slow, steady. He lowered the rifle from his shoulder, not aimed, just held. His eyes locked on the sheriff's. The sheriff bristled. "What's that mean?" The Apache didn't speak. He only planted the rifle butt in the dirt, leaning on it like a stake. The widow's voice carried in the silence. "It means the children stay." The sheriff scanned them both, calculating. "You think you can defy the governor's orders?" "I think I can keep 4 mouths from starving," she shot back. "They'll send more men," the sheriff warned. "Let them," she said. The sheriff turned his gaze to the Apache again, eyes narrowing. "And what about you? You think standing quiet makes you strong? You'll hang quicker than she will." The Apache's stare didn't waver. The widow stepped fully off the porch, dust curling around her boots. "He doesn't answer to you. Neither do I." The sheriff straightened in the saddle, hands tightening on the reins. "This isn't finished." The widow's voice lowered, fierce. "It is tonight." The sheriff pulled the reins, horse stomping against the ground. He held his glare a moment longer, then spat again. "You'll regret this." He turned the horse, riding back down the road. Dust rose and lingered long after he was gone. The widow stood still, chest heaving. She turned toward the Apache. "Why didn't you speak?" He looked at her. Then at the house, where the children pressed against the glass again. Finally, he said, low, rough, "Didn't need to." The widow shook her head. You let him call you names without saying a word. The Apache's eyes stayed steady. Words don't break bone. The widow's mouth twisted, but they stain. He didn't answer. The children slipped out onto the porch then, bare feet pattering against the wood. The boy asked, "He coming back?" The widow crouched down to him. "Yes." The boy's face fell. "Then what do we do?" The Apache's voice cut quiet. "Stay." The widow looked up at him. "Stay and fight?" He didn't blink. "Stay." The widow rose, hands trembling. She glanced at the children clinging to one another, then at the rifle planted in the dirt. Her voice came soft, almost breaking. "Then God help us." The children stayed close as the night fell. The house creaked under their weight, under their fear, and the road stayed empty for now. But the dust hadn't settled. The sheriff came back before morning broke. The children woke to the sound of hooves tearing at the dirt, dogs barking down the road. The widow stood at the window, jaw set tight. The Apache was already in the yard, rifle cradled across his arms. The sheriff dismounted heavy, boots hitting hard against the ground. Two deputies trailed behind, lean and mean, hands near their belts. The sheriff's eyes went straight to the porch, where the children huddled behind the widow's skirt. "Move aside," he barked. The widow didn't. "They're not yours to take." "They're not yours to keep," he fired back. The Apache stepped closer, silent, rifle low, but ready. The sheriff's lip curled. "You gonna let him speak for you?" The widow cut in, sharp. "He doesn't need to. I'll say it plain. The children stay." The sheriff's shoulders squared. "Not your choice. It's mine today." One deputy spit into the dirt. "You think a fence and an Indian gonna hold back the law?" The widow's eyes burned. "I think no law fed them. No law cleaned their wounds. No law listened when they begged at my fence. So don't come here talking law." The sheriff stepped forward, boots crunching dry earth. "This ain't about mercy. This is order." "Order?" The widow's voice cracked, but she didn't step back. "Order buried my husband. Order turned its head when men came for girls in the night. Don't tell me about order." The children clung tighter, eyes wide, breaths sharp. The smallest whispered, "Papa," toward the Apache again. The sheriff heard it. His eyes narrowed. "That what they call him?" The widow straightened. "That's what they call him, and I won't take it from them." The deputies laughed, short and ugly. "They're confused," one said. "Starved out. Half mad." "They're alive," the widow snapped. "That's more than anyone gave them until now." The sheriff's hand twitched near his gun. "Last chance. Step aside." The widow planted her boots in the dirt. "You'll walk through me first." The moment hung heavy, airtight, hearts pounding. The Apache shifted his weight, rifle angled just enough to speak without words. The deputies went still, eyes darting. The sheriff glared at him. "You really ready to die for this?" The Apache didn't answer. His silence was its own wall. The widow broke it. "He's not the one standing in your way. I am." The sheriff clenched his jaw. "You lost everything once. You willing to lose it again?" The widow's voice dropped steady as stone. "I've already lost. What's left is mine to guard." The deputies muttered, restless. The sheriff glanced back at them, then at the porch, then at the Apache's rifle gleaming under the pale morning. His jaw worked, weighing the ground. Finally he spat. "Fine. Keep them, but don't say you weren't warned." The widow's breath came slow, measured. "I don't scare easy." The sheriff turned, boots grinding the dust. He climbed onto his horse, deputies mounting behind. He gave the yard one last look. "You'll hang for this," he growled. "Maybe," the widow said, "but not today." The sheriff yanked his reins. The horses kicked up dirt and were gone, their shadows dragging behind them. The widow stood frozen until the sound faded. Only then did she turn to the children. "Inside, now." They obeyed, rushing through the door, bare feet thumping wood. The Apache stayed in the yard, eyes on the road, long after it cleared. The widow joined him, voice hushed. "You'd have fired." He gave the smallest nod. She swallowed hard. "And I'd have buried them after." His eyes lifted to hers. There was no surprise in them, no judgment, only quiet understanding. The widow exhaled. "Then it's settled." She turned back toward the house, children waiting in the doorway. their faces pale but steadier now. The widow's voice rose firm, final. You stay, no matter who comes, no matter what they say. You stay. The children nodded, almost as one. The word hung in the air, binding. The Apache leaned his rifle against the fence post again, silence as deep as ever. But when the little girl whispered "Papa" from the porch, he didn't turn away. The widow watched him, chest tight, then faced the house. She knew the sheriff would return, not alone, not forgiving. But her choice had been carved into the dirt now, unshakable. The children stayed. Her word was final. The house breathed different after dark. The boards moaned under weight that wasn't there, air thick as though walls held their own memory. The widow sat in her bed but didn't sleep. She could hear them through the hall, small voices, hushed, spilling over each other in broken rhythm. She rose slow, bare feet against the cold wood, and moved to the children's room. The door was cracked just enough for her to lean close. She pressed her ear to the gap, breath caught in her chest. The whispers tangled, one child's voice, then another, sometimes too many at once, sometimes words that weren't children's at all, low, rasped, not belonging to the little bodies huddled under thin blankets. I told you not to look. They took her hands. Papa said wait. Her skin prickled. She gripped the frame tight. The boy's voice rose, sharp. Stop it. Another voice replied, softer. We can't. The widow's throat burned. She pushed the door wider. The children lay side by side on the floor, too crowded for the small bed. Their eyes were closed, but their mouths kept moving. Whisper after whisper, words spilling like a current that wouldn't break. She stepped inside, knees trembling. Stop, she said. The whispers didn't falter. The smallest girl stirred, eyes fluttering open. She turned her head, gaze fixed on the dark corner of the room. Papa, she whispered. The widow's heart hammered. He's not here. The girl didn't look at her. She smiled faint, lips cracked. He's always here. The widow's breath hitched. What do you mean? The boy's eyes snapped open, sudden, wide. Don't ask her that. The widow crouched low, voice fierce. Tell me what's happening. The boy shook his head, face pale in the moonlight. If we say, it comes back. The girl whispered again, soft, almost humming. Papa. The widow's voice cracked. Stop calling him that. The boy sat up fast. Don't tell her to stop. It's the only thing that keeps us safe. The widow's chest ached. Safe from what? The children's voices rose again, all at once, overlapping, impossible to separate. Names she didn't know, numbers counted backward, fragments of songs she'd never heard. The sound of it filled the room like a storm pressing through cracks. She stumbled back to the hall, slammed the door shut. Her breath came ragged. She pressed her back to the wall, listening. The whispers seeped through wood, still spilling, still overlapping. The Apache stood at the end of the hall, shadow-heavy, rifle in hand. He hadn't made a sound, but he was there, watching. You heard? She asked, voice shaking. He nodded once. You just stand there. He didn't answer. They're speaking things that ain't theirs, she whispered. His eyes stayed on her, unreadable. You've heard it before, she said. He didn't move. Tell me, she pressed. What is it? He walked forward slow. Boots silent against the floor. He stopped in front of the door, head tilted, listening. The whispers didn't stop. His hand brushed the wood, fingers steady. Finally he spoke, voice low, deep. Memory. The widow blinked. Memory? He nodded. She shook her head. No memory sounds like that. He looked at her once, then back at the door. Yours don't. Her breath caught. She stepped back, arms wrapping tight around herself. You think I'm letting this stand? Children in my house speaking with voices not their own? He didn't answer. Her voice sharpened. I should send them away. The whispers inside grew louder, like they heard her. The children's voices rose together, chanting now, Don't, don't, don't. The widow pressed her palms to her ears. God help me. The Apache's eyes closed. He stood still, breathing deep, like he was carrying the sound instead of fighting it. When he opened his eyes again, he looked at her and said, It won't stop. Her throat clenched. Then what? He didn't answer. He only turned, walked back down the hall, rifle steady in his hand. The widow leaned against the wall, shaking. The whispers slowed behind the door, softening to broken words. then back to silence. She slid down the wall, knees to her chest. The boards creaked above her. Wind pressing against the shutters. She buried her face in her hands. The children's last murmur carried faint through the wood, a single word that echoed too deep for their small mouths. "Papa." The widow raised her head, eyes burning. She whispered to the empty hall, voice raw. "He isn't. He never was." But no one answered, not even the Apache. The coughing started just before dawn, sharp, tearing, too deep for a child's chest. The widow hurried into the room, lamp shaking in her hand. The smallest boy sat hunched forward, hands pressed to his mouth. When he pulled them away, the light caught red. The other children backed into the corner. Wide-eyed, silent, the boy coughed again, harder, drops spattering across the floorboards. The widow's stomach knotted. She grabbed the rag off the dresser, an old cloth kept from her husband's time, frayed at the edges, but soft enough to hold. "Lie back," she said. The boy shook his head. "Hurts. I know it hurts. Lie back." She pressed the cloth to his mouth. The stain spread quick, dark and heavy. His eyes watered, breath shallow. The Apache stepped into the doorway, rifle slung over his shoulder. He didn't speak. He leaned against the frame, shadow filling the room. The widow snapped at him, voice trembling. "Don't just stand there." He didn't move. She pressed the cloth harder. "He's burning up," she whispered. "Can't you see?" The boy's body shook under her hands. Another cough racked through him, more blood soaking the rag. She turned on the Apache, eyes fierce. "Have you seen this before?" He held her gaze. Then he nodded once. Her chest tightened. "What does it mean?" He didn't answer. She shoved the cloth into the basin, wrung it out, pressed it back against the boy's mouth. "You've seen it. Tell me." The Apache's face didn't change. The widow's voice cracked. "You'll let him die like this?" Still, no answer. The boy reached up weakly, fingers curling around the widow's wrist. "Don't send me away," he whispered. She shook her head fast. "I won't." The smallest girl whispered from the corner, "Papa knows." The widow turned sharp. "Stop saying that." The girl didn't flinch. "Papa knows what to do." The widow looked back at the Apache. "If you know something." He stepped into the room, slow, steady. He crouched beside the boy, pressed his hand flat against the child's chest. The boy gasped, eyes wide, but didn't pull away. The Apache leaned close, listening to the rattling breath. Then he took the cloth from the widow's hand. She froze as he dipped it back in the basin, wrung it out with practiced care, and pressed it gentle against the boy's lips again. His movements were calm, almost ritual, as though this was something he'd done before. The widow's throat tightened. "Where did you learn that?" He didn't look at her. "Answer me." He shook his head once, firm, like the question itself was forbidden. The boy coughed again, weaker this time. The cloth caught it. The stain deepened. The widow whispered low, "This house will never wash clean." The Apache laid the cloth flat across the boy's mouth until the coughs slowed. The boy's eyes closed, chest easing just enough to find shallow breath again. The other children crept forward, huddled close but silent. The girl reached out, fingers brushing the edge of the cloth as though it was something holy. The widow slapped her hand away. "Don't touch it." The girl's eyes welled, but she didn't speak. The widow stood, cloth dripping crimson into the basin. She gripped its weight tight, hands shaking. She whispered to the Apache, "How many times have you seen this?" He met her eyes. He held them steady. Then he raised one finger. Her stomach dropped. One before this. He nodded. "Who?" she asked. He didn't answer. Her voice broke. "You let me keep them." "Knowing." His silence was the only answer. She looked at the boy, pale against the floor, breath shallow but steady. She pressed the cloth to her chest, stain bleeding against her dress. The girl whispered again, voice thin. "Papa saved him." The widow's eyes burned. "Don't." The Apache rose, setting the cloth back into the basin, water swirling dark around it. He wiped his hands against his trousers, calm, like the moment belonged to him. The widow stared at the basin, the red spreading, like it wanted to fill the whole house. She whispered, to herself this time, "Every cloth in this place ends the same." The children huddled tighter. The boy's breath steadied, but the sound of it was ragged, A reminder. The widow sank against the wall, head in her hands. The Apache stood silent, shadow long across the floor, rifle leaning near. The cloth floated in the basin, stained, dark, and unyielding. By noon, the dust rose again, not from one rider, but three. The widow saw them first through the wavering heat on the road. Their coats were too fine for the land, black wool powdered with dirt, hats low, collars stiff, suits, but worn thin from travel. Government men. The children shrank back from the window as the riders approached the gate. The Apache already stood in the yard, rifle in hand. The widow joined him, apron still on, cloth stains not yet dry. The men dismounted slow, boots sinking in dust. One of them stepped forward, tall, voice smooth, like he'd rehearsed it. "By order of the governor, we've come for the children." The widow's voice cut sharp. "They're not yours." "They belong to the state," the man replied. "They belong to no one," she shot back. Another man, shorter, meaner around the eyes, glanced at the Apache. "And you let him guard them? What message you think that sends?" The Apache didn't move. The widow stepped forward. "They stay here." The tall man sighed, tipping his hat back. "This isn't a request, ma'am. They've been marked wards. You understand what that means?" The widow's eyes didn't falter. "I understand they were starving at my fence. I understand nobody else cared." The third man spoke then, voice dry as paper. "You're interfering in matters bigger than you. We have orders." The widow's jaw tightened. "I have my own." The tall man's smile slipped. "You want to set yourself against the governor?" The Apache shifted the rifle in his hands. The smallest sound of metal echoed heavy in the air. The men's eyes darted. The short one muttered, "Careful now." The widow raised her chin. "You think a piece of paper means more than their lives." The tall man snapped back. "It means order." The widow's voice broke sharp. "Order didn't save them. Order never saves anyone but the men who wrote it." The air held still. The children huddled inside, breath fogging the glass, eyes wide on the standoff. The short man's hand brushed his coat. A gun showed just enough. The Apache's rifle tilted higher, slow, deliberate. The widow's hand went up, steady between them. "Don't," she warned. The tall man glared. "You're choosing wrong." The widow's eyes locked on his. "I'm choosing them." The tall man studied her face. Then the Apache's silence. Then the rifle's leaning invisible weight across the yard. His voice dropped lower. "You don't know what you're crossing into." "Try me," the widow said. The man's lips pressed thin. He signaled with a flick of his hand. The other two eased back, though their eyes stayed mean. The tall man straightened his coat. "We'll return with papers, with men. You won't stand in the way forever." The widow's voice cut cold. "Then you best bring shovels with you." The short man spat into the dirt. "This ain't over." The Apache's rifle rose an inch. His silence sharpened like a blade. The short man stiffened. But the tall one laid a hand on his arm. "Not today," he muttered. They turned back to their horses. Dust clung to their suits, black fading to gray. Before mounting, the tall man looked back once more. "You'll regret this stand." The widow's voice stayed even. "Maybe, but not today." They mounted, spurred their horses, and rode off. Dust swallowed them until the road was empty again. The widow stood frozen in the yard, heart pounding. The Apache lowered his rifle slow, planting the butt in the dirt. The children spilled out onto the porch, voices shaking. "Who were they?" the boy asked. The widow's face hardened. "Men who think they own everything." The girl clutched her skirt. "Will they come back?" "Yes," the widow said. "When?" "Soon." The children's faces paled. The widow knelt, voice softer. "You don't have to be afraid, not while you're here." The boy's jaw trembled, but they had papers. The widow's eyes burned. "Papers don't hold guns. People do." The Apache's voice cut in, deep, steady. "They'll bring both." The widow looked at him, chest tight. "Then we'll be ready." The children stayed close as the widow herded them inside. The Apache remained in the yard, rifle still in hand, eyes fixed on the horizon where dust still lingered faint. The house carried the weight of the warning. The widow knew the men would come again. Stronger, colder, backed by law that never cared for children or widows or silence, but the choice had already been made. The children stayed. Guns or papers, governor or sheriff, it didn't matter. The line had been drawn, and the yard still held the silence of the Apache, unbroken, heavier than any word. It was the smallest girl who led them there. Afternoon light had sunk low, shadows long across the yard. She tugged the widow's hand, eyes fixed past the barn toward the weeds where the ground sagged soft. The widow followed slow, children trailing behind. The Apache walked at the rear, rifle loose at his side, steps heavy. The girl stopped before the old stone well, stones chipped, wood cover warped and half rotted. She pointed. Down there. The widow's breath hitched. What's down there? The girl didn't answer. She just stared. The boy shifted uneasy. We shouldn't. The widow dropped to her knees, hands gripping the rim. The wood groaned as she shoved it aside. A stale draft rose, damp and foul. She peered into the dark, eyes straining. At first, she saw nothing. Then the light caught. Bones, piled deep. White gleam scattered against black water. Small bones, thin. Too many. Her stomach turned. Dear God! The children shrank back, but the little girl leaned closer, voice barely a whisper. Shoes. The widow squinted. At the edge of the pile she saw them, tiny shoes, leather cracked, laces rotted but still tied, and among them metal badges, dull with rust but clear enough. Her hand shot to her mouth. She swayed where she knelt. The Apache stepped forward, looking down without flinching, his head lowered, slow as though in prayer. The widow's voice broke. How many? He didn't answer. She turned, sharp, desperate. How many? His silence was the only reply. The boy's voice cracked behind her. They threw them in. Said nobody'd find us if we went quiet. The widow snapped around. Who said that? The boy's face twisted. Men with stars, men with coats. Her chest caved. She looked back into the well, badges gleaming faint, caught between bones. The air smelled of rust and rot, old as memory. The smallest girl whispered again. They sang when they dropped them. The widow froze. What song? The girl's lips moved, soft, tuneless hum, words half broken. The sound crawled under the widow's skin, cold and hollow. She clutched the rim tight. Stop! The girl stopped, but the echo hung. The Apache closed his eyes, head still bowed. The widow's hands shook. You knew. He opened his eyes, steady on hers. You knew, she said again, louder. His silence was answer enough. She stumbled back, almost falling. How could you let me bring them here? How could you? The boy cut in fierce. We were already here, long before you let us in. The widow's throat tightened. She looked at the children's faces, pale, eyes too old for their years. She looked back at the well, darkness swallowing light. The Apache laid a hand on the rim, rough fingers against stone. His voice came low, steady. Ground remembers. The widow's breath caught. And so do they. The little girl nodded. That's why we called him Papa. He remembers too. The widow's chest ached. No, she whispered. He's not. But the word faltered. The children turned away, huddling close. The boy muttered, voice raw. They'll come for us again, just like the others. The widow stepped forward, fierce. Not while I'm breathing. Her eyes burned as she stared into the well one last time. Bones, shoes, badges, proof no one would claim. Proof buried deep by lawmen who wrote order with blood. She slammed the cover shut. The sound cracked sharp against the yard. The children flinched. The widow straightened, voice steady now. This land is soaked. But you're not going down there. Not while I stand. The Apache lifted his head at last. He met her eyes, gave the smallest nod. The widow's hands trembled, but her voice did not. Let them bring papers. Let them bring guns. They'll answer for every bone. The children pressed closer to her, clutching her skirt. The Apache stood still, rifle against his shoulder, shadow long in the setting light. The well stayed quiet, but its memory clung to the air, heavy, unshakable. The widow gathered them in the main room after the sun went down. Fire cracked low in the hearth, shadows jumping against the walls. She stood stiff in the center. Apron still dust-stained from the yard. The children huddled together on the floor, knees drawn close, eyes flicking from her face to the Apache's figure leaning silent against the wall. The widow's voice came sharp, too sharp to hide the tremor in it. No more whispers, no more shadows. You're going to tell me what happened. Every word. The boy looked down at his hands. The smaller girl clutched her brother's sleeve. The widow pressed forward. You begged at my fence. You called him Papa. You pointed to that well. Now you speak plain. The boy shook his head slow. It'll come back if we do. The widow snapped. It already has. It lives here now. Look at me. His eyes rose, wet and hard. Tell me, she demanded. The girl's voice slipped out first, soft, almost breaking. They locked us away. The boy flinched. Stop. But the others followed, voices weaving, words tumbling together, in rooms with no windows, chains on the doors. They said don't cry or they'll hear. The widow's heart hammered. Who locked you? The boy's jaw trembled. Men. The smallest whispered. With stars on their chests. The widow's breath caught. Sheriffs. The children nodded, all at once, unblinking. Her voice shook. Why? The words spilled together now, overlapping. Not waiting for one another. They brought men with money. They stood in lines. They pointed. They chose. The widow staggered back. Chose what? The boy's voice cracked. Us. The widow pressed her hand to her mouth. No. The children's voices overlapped again. They said don't fight. They said smile. They said sing. The widow slammed her hand against the table. Enough. But the words didn't stop. They lit fires outside so nobody would see. The smoke never left. They laughed when we coughed. The widow shook her head, tears hot. No, no, no. The Apache stood still, face shadowed, but his hands clenched against his rifle. The widow spun toward him. You knew. His silence burned. Answer me, she cried. He didn't move. The children's voices rose louder, a tide breaking. They buried the ones who didn't make it. They buried them deep. They said no one would ever know. The widow's chest heaved. She dropped to her knees before them. How long? The boy whispered. Always. Her voice broke. How many? The older girl's face was pale as bone. More than us. The smallest girl pressed her hand to the widow's cheek. That's why we found you. The widow clutched her hand tight, sobbing. Why me? Because you listened, the girl said. The widow's shoulders shook. She looked at them, at all of them, and whispered, I can't carry this alone. The boy's voice was flat. Then don't. Let us speak. The widow pulled herself upright, wiping her face with the back of her hand. Her voice steadied, fierce. Then speak, every word. Say it, so the walls hear, so the ground remembers. Say it. The children's voices surged together, stronger now, no longer whispers. They kept us in the church cellar. They said it was God's work. They said we were lucky. They brought us up one by one. The widow's chest burned. Who brought you? Lawmen, preachers, families with money, names carved on plaques. The widow gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. Say their names. The children's mouths opened, voices spilling name after name. Too many to follow. Judges, sheriffs, men who'd held office, families that still lived in houses lit with oil lamps and lined with books. Names the widow had heard her whole life, spoken with respect. She staggered back, bile rising in her throat. All of them. Yes, the children said in unison. Her knees weakened. She sank into a chair. God forgive us. The boy shook his head. God never came. The fire in the hearth spat, sparks jumping. The widow looked up at the Apache, desperate. Say something. Say this isn't true. He didn't. Her voice cracked. Why won't you speak? He finally lifted his eyes. His voice came low, gravel deep, because I already heard it once. The widow's stomach dropped. Where? He looked at the floor. Different children, long before these. The widow's head spun. And you let it keep happening? His silence was the only answer. The children's chant rose again. They said no one would believe. They said no one would listen. They said it would stay buried. The widow slammed her fist against the table, voice breaking. Not anymore. I hear you. I hear every word. The children stared at her, voices finally falling quiet. The widow's breath came ragged. She leaned forward, eyes burning. "You're not shadows. You're not forgotten. You're not theirs anymore." The boy's voice quivered. "Then what are we?" The widow's throat ached. "You're mine now, as long as I stand." The smallest girl crept closer, pressed her face into the widow's lap. "Papa, too." The widow's eyes filled again. She looked at the Apache. His face stayed still, but his eyes were heavy, dark, carrying what she couldn't yet name. She whispered, more plea than command. "Say something to them." He didn't. The widow bent low, pressing her lips to the child's hair. "Then I will." She cupped the girl's face, then looked at all of them, voice trembling but steady enough. "You're safe here, no matter who comes, no matter what law says, no matter what papers they carry. You're safe." The boy's shoulders shook. He buried his face in his hands. The other children leaned against one another, silent tears on their cheeks. The widow pulled them closer, arms wrapping around as many as she could hold. The fire hissed and popped, the night pressing tight against the windows. The house carried their voices still, echoes of truths ripped out at last. No justice yet, no reckoning. But the silence had broken, and once broken, it would not heal. The dogs barked first, then came the glow. Flickers of orange cutting through the dark beyond the fence, growing brighter with every step of boot and horse. The widow pulled the children back from the window, her hands firm on their shoulders. "Stay close. Don't move unless I say." The Apache was already outside. He stood on the porch, rifle laid across his arms, body still as the boards beneath his boots. His shadow stretched long against the house, a figure carved out of silence. The sheriff's voice carried before he appeared. "Bring them out, widow, now." The widow opened the door just enough to see. The sheriff stood with 5 men at his back, each holding torches that spat sparks into the night air. Their faces glowed in the firelight, hard and mean. She stepped onto the porch beside the Apache. "You come here burning, to a house with children." The sheriff sneered. "They're not yours. They're ours by law." The widow's voice cracked sharp. "Law fed them nothing. Law threw them away." The sheriff lifted his torch higher. "Last chance." The Apache raised his rifle, slow, steady. His silence spoke louder than any word. The sheriff's men shifted uneasily, eyes darting. One muttered, "He'll fire." The sheriff spat into the dirt. "Then we'll burn the whole place down." The widow's chest heaved. "You do, and you'll hang for it." The sheriff laughed, rough and bitter. "Hang? From whose rope? Every rope in this county's mine." The widow took a step forward, boots on the edge of the porch. "Then you'll watch me burn with them, because I'm not moving." The children pressed tighter against the window behind her. Their faces glowed pale in the firelight. The sheriff's eyes flicked to the house, then back to the Apache. "Step aside," he ordered. The Apache's rifle shifted up, barrel catching the torchlight. He didn't blink. The men muttered again, restless. One said, "This ain't worth it." The sheriff snapped, "Quiet." The widow's voice cut through. "You already buried enough bones. You want more? Do it in the open this time." The sheriff's grip tightened on the torch. His voice came low. "You don't know what you're standing against." The widow's breath shook, but her eyes didn't. "I know exactly. I'm standing against you." The sheriff raised his hand, motioning the men forward, torches lifted higher, heat pushing toward the porch. The Apache cocked the rifle. The sound cracked through the night, sharp as thunder. The men froze. The sheriff's jaw worked. "You won't fire." The widow stepped closer to the edge. "Try him." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "You'd fight the law for them." "They're not the law's to take," she said. The flames hissed, smoke curling around them. The house seemed to breathe heavier, wood groaning under the weight of the standoff. One of the men muttered again, voice shaking. "Sheriff, they ain't worth this. Not tonight." The sheriff turned on him, rage flashing. "You shut your mouth." The man stepped back, torch shaking in his hand. The fire spit sparks across the dirt. The widow raised her voice so all could hear. "You bring fire to a house with children and call yourself men?" No one answered. The Apache's rifle stayed fixed on the sheriff. His eyes never moved. The sheriff finally lowered his torch, lips curling. "Fine. Keep them tonight, but tomorrow we come with more." The widow's voice stayed steady. "Tomorrow we'll be ready." The sheriff glared long, then turned. "Let's go." The men hesitated, but followed. Torches dimmed as they walked, their glow swallowed by the dark. The widow's body sagged, knees weak. She gripped the railing to hold herself up. The Apache lowered his rifle, setting the butt against the porch. He looked at her, silent, waiting. Her voice cracked low. "They'll be back." He nodded once. The children opened the door behind them, small faces peering out. The boy asked, voice trembling, "Did we stop them?" The widow looked at him, eyes heavy. "For now." The girl whispered, "But the fire." The widow cut her off, firm. "It didn't touch us." The boy's lips pressed tight. "It will." The widow pulled him close, hand gripping the back of his head. "Not while I stand." The children clung to her. The firelight was gone now, only the smell of smoke lingering in the yard. The night felt heavier, darker, like the house itself had taken the strike of the warning. The Apache stood still on the porch, rifle in hand, eyes fixed on the empty road. The widow whispered, almost to herself, "This house won't hold forever." But she didn't move. She held the children tighter, and the silence between her and the Apache grew stronger, binding them against what was still to come. The night cracked open fast. The torches came again, brighter, closer, flames clawing the dark. The sheriff stood at the front, eyes hard. Men lined behind him like shadows set to burn the world. The widow stood on the porch, rifle in her hands now. Children pressed tight behind the door. The Apache stood beside her, still as ever, rifle slung loose across his arm. The sheriff shouted, "Last chance!" The widow's jaw clenched. "You already had yours." A man in the line pitched his torch high. It spun through the air, fire trailing, landing against the porch rail. Wood caught with a hungry hiss. The widow didn't think. She raised the rifle and fired. The shot cracked like thunder. The sheriff staggered, torch falling from his grip, hand pressed to his chest. His knees buckled, and he dropped hard into the dirt. Silence followed, sharp and choking. The men froze, torches trembling in their fists. Smoke curled from the porch rail. The children screamed behind the door, but the sound was swallowed by the night. The widow's arms shook, but she steadied the rifle, barrel still smoking. Her breath came ragged, eyes locked on the sheriff's body lying motionless in the dirt. One of the deputies shouted, "You killed him!" The widow snapped back, voice raw. "He brought fire to my door." The men shifted, rage pulling at them, fear holding them back. The Apache didn't move. He didn't lift his rifle, didn't blink. He only gave the smallest nod, once, as if the shot had always been hers to take. The widow's voice cut sharp. "Step closer and I'll put another down." The men muttered, restless, torches shaking. One raised his pistol. "She can't shoot us all." The Apache finally spoke, low and deep. "Try." The word carried like a strike. The men flinched, eyes darting. The widow raised her rifle again, steady now. "Who's next?" No one stepped forward. The sheriff lay still, blood soaking the dirt around him, badge glinting faint in the firelight. The widow's stomach twisted, but she didn't lower her aim. The boy pushed the door open a crack, whispering, "Mama?" The widow hissed, "Stay inside." Her eyes never left the line of men. One deputy cursed, spitting into the ground. "This is murder." The widow's voice broke cold. So was every bone in that well. The words hit heavy. The men went quiet, shifting on their boots. Smoke curled from the porch rail, heat licking the boards, but no one moved to throw another torch. The Apache stepped down one stair, rifle in hand now, slow and deliberate. His silence pressed heavier than any threat. The men backed a pace. Fear rippled through them, quiet but clear. The widow called out, voice sharp, "You walk away now, or you lay down beside him." They hesitated, eyes flicking between her rifle and the Apache's shadow. One finally muttered, "Not worth dying here." The others followed, turning, torches lowering. Their boots dragged as they stepped back into the dark. The widow held the rifle firm until the glow of their flames faded down the road. Only then did her arms drop. The weight of the shot sank into her chest, heavy as stone. She looked at the sheriff's body lying twisted in the dirt. Her breath hitched, sharp and fast. She whispered, almost to herself, "God forgive me." The Apache climbed the porch again, standing beside her. He didn't speak, didn't comfort. He only gave another nod, once, as if nothing more needed saying. The boy opened the door wider, eyes wide, face pale. "He's dead." The widow turned, voice firm though it shook. Yes. The children stared at the body in the dirt, silence pressing against their small shoulders. The girl whispered, "He would have burned us." The widow pulled her close. "He won't now." The house smelled of smoke and gunpowder, heavy, thick. The porch rail still smoldered, wood blackened where the torch had struck. The widow grabbed a pail, doused it fast, water hissing against charred wood. She leaned against the rail, chest heaving. The Apache set his rifle against the wall, silent as ever. The children huddled on the porch, watching her, eyes heavy with fear and awe. The boy said quiet, "You fired first." The widow met his gaze. "I had to." The boy nodded slow. "So did we." Her stomach turned at the words, but she said nothing. The Apache's eyes stayed on her, unblinking. She met them, trembling. "It's done. No turning back now." He nodded once more. The night held still, the sheriff's body cooling in the dirt, the stars above watching like silent witnesses. The widow gripped the rifle tighter, the children clung closer, and the house knew what it meant to fire first. They came at dawn, 3 wagons rattling with men in suits and deputies in dust. The sheriff's body still lay in the ground behind the house, unmarked, but already the governor's men spoke of law, of trials, of order. The widow stood in the yard, children gathered tight around her, the Apache a silent figure at her side. The tall man from before stepped forward, his coat sharp despite the dust. "You've killed an officer. You'll answer for it. The children will testify in court. Not here." The widow's voice cut steady. "No." The man blinked. "No?" She lifted her chin. "I won't stand in a room full of men who wear the same badges as those who buried children in that well." The deputies shifted, murmurs rippling. The tall man barked back, "Justice doesn't work in your yard." The widow's eyes burned. "Neither does silence." He stepped closer, voice hard. "You can't choose the rules." "I can," she said, "and I will." The boy's voice rose from behind her, trembling but sharp. "We'll tell it here, to everyone." The widow glanced back at him, her hand steady on his shoulder. "Yes, here." The tall man's jaw tightened. "You'll be cut down for this." The widow turned toward the road. Already townsfolk were gathering, drawn by wagons, by whispers, by the promise of spectacle. Mothers clutching shawls, fathers stiff with suspicion, boys climbing fences for a better view. The widow raised her voice. "Then let them hear." She pushed the children forward. They stepped into the open, eyes darting, hands trembling. The townsfolk hushed. The widow spoke clear, loud enough for every ear. "Tell them what you told me." The children froze. The crowd shifted. The tall man sneered. "They're scared. They won't speak without oath, without order." The widow's voice cut back. "Oath means nothing to men who broke theirs long ago." "Speak." The smallest girl whispered first, voice thin but caring. "They locked us in the church cellar." Gasps rippled. The boy added, louder now, "They brought men with money." The older girl stepped forward. "They made us sing so they could choose." The youngest clutched her chest. "They burned fires so no one would see." The widow's throat ached, but she pressed. "Say their names." The children spoke at once, voices overlapping, unflinching. Names rolled out, sheriffs, judges, merchants, men whose families stood in the crowd now, faces blanching pale. The townsfolk shifted, murmurs swelling. Mothers pulled children closer. Fathers looked to the ground. The tall man snapped, "Lies! You put these words in their mouths." The widow's eyes cut to him. "I put nothing. They carry it themselves." The boy shouted, sudden and fierce, "They buried the ones who didn't live." The crowd gasped again. The widow's voice cracked but held. "I saw the well, bones, shoes, badges." Eyes turned wide. Whispers spread fast. Some faces hardened, some broke, some turned away in shame. The tall man raised his voice, desperate now. "This isn't a trial. This is chaos." The widow stepped forward, fierce. "Chaos is burying children and calling it order. Chaos is fire at a widow's door. This," she pointed to the children, "this is truth." The children cried out again, together. They said no one would believe. They said no one would listen. The widow raised her voice above them. "Do you believe now?" The crowd roared, torn between outrage and grief. Some shouted lies, others wept, others cursed names that had been spoken aloud for the first time. The tall man tried once more. Without a court, it means nothing. The widow glared. It means everything, because they heard. She gestured to the crowd. Every mother, every father, every child, they heard. The Apache stepped forward at last, rifle in his hand, his silence as heavy as the words that filled the yard. He looked at the tall man, then at the crowd, then gave the smallest nod. The tall man's face twisted. "You'll regret this." The widow's voice cut back like steel. "Not as much as you will." The crowd swelled closer, voices rising, anger boiling. The names the children had spoken hung in the air like smoke, impossible to sweep away. The governor's men stepped back, uneasy, their hold slipping against the tide of witness. The widow pulled the children close again, wrapping her arms around them. "It's done," she whispered. "They can't silence you now." The Apache stood behind her, rifle steady, shadow long across the ground. The town would never be the same. The trial had already happened, and it would not be forgotten. The smell rose before they saw it. Smoke turned sour, ash clinging to the air like a hand on the throat. The widow followed the Apache past the barn, children trailing in silence. The smallest girl clutched her sleeve, whispering, "It's awake again." They reached the well. The old cover had been shoved aside, the rim blackened. Ash drifted up with the draft, soft flakes floating against the dying light. The widow's stomach tightened as she peered down. Not just bones now, bodies, charred, half-burned, crumpled in the dark, badges still pinned to scorched cloth. The stink of fat and fire twisted in her chest. She staggered back. "Dear God!" The boy's voice shook. "They burned them." The widow shook her head, eyes wide on the Apache. "No, not they." She pointed at him. "You." He didn't move, didn't flinch. His face stayed as still as ever, but his silence was louder than words. The widow's hands trembled. "How long? How many?" He lowered his head, slow, deliberate. The boy whispered, "All the ones who came before." The widow's voice cracked. "You've been burying them here, burning them and throwing them down." The Apache's gaze stayed fixed on the black mouth of the well. His hand tightened against the rifle, but he said nothing. The widow pressed her palms to her temples. "You let me think this house was only haunted by memory. You didn't tell me it was you. Your silence." Her voice faltered. "Your silence was method." The little girl's whisper cut in, soft but steady. "Papa cleans." The widow's breath shook. "Cleans. He's covering it, hiding it." The boy shook his head. "He's keeping us safe." The widow's voice broke. "By burying truth in ash?" The Apache lifted his eyes then. He met hers with a weight that made her chest seize. He finally spoke, voice low, gravel deep. "Truth don't live in courts. Truth lives here." The widow froze. "So you kill them." He gave the smallest nod. Her legs weakened. She grabbed the well's rim for balance. "And I thought I was the one defying law." The boy's voice rose, sharp. "Law never came for us." "He did." The widow stared down again, at the blackened heap, badges glinting faint, the men she had grown up hearing of, sheriffs, deputies, lawmen, reduced to ash in the pit. A grave no town would mark, no preacher would bless. Her voice came thin. "You've been writing history with fire." The Apache stayed silent. She turned on him, fierce now. "Say it plain. Why?" He looked at the children. His eyes lingered on them, heavy, then returned to hers. "So they don't come back." The widow's chest tightened. "And now?" His jaw flexed, but no answer came. The children pressed closer to the widow, eyes wide, as though they already knew. The girl whispered, "They'll come anyway." The widow gripped the well's rim, whispering to herself, "Ash don't end it. Ash feeds it." She pushed the cover back over the well, hands shaking. The sound rang sharp in the yard. She turned to the Apache. "You think silence will protect us?" "It won't. Not anymore." He didn't move. She stepped closer, voice raw. "But I'll stand with you, because now I see. You weren't ignoring it. You were answering it. In your way." The children clung to her skirt. The boy asked, "What happens now?" The widow swallowed hard. "Now it spreads. Every name spoken, every body found. It spreads until no one can cover it." The Apache lowered his head once more, as if in agreement, as if in mourning. The well sat silent again, cover closed, ash hidden below. But the smell lingered, and the widow knew it always would. His silence had never been emptiness. It was judgment. It was method. It was justice buried in bone and fire. The night had quieted after the smoke, after the fire, after the bodies in the well. The house stood worn but unbroken, boards blackened at the rail, windows lined with tired eyes that hadn't closed in days. The widow sat at the table, head heavy in her hands, while the children curled in a heap on the floor, clinging to one another. The Apache stood by the door, rifle resting against the frame, shadow long in the lantern glow. His silence weighed thicker than the air itself. The smallest girl stirred first. She pushed herself up, eyes half shut with sleep, and crossed the room. She stopped before him, lifting her arms. "Papa," she whispered. The widow's heart clenched. She rose quick, voice sharp. "Don't call him that." But the girl only pressed closer, arms reaching. The Apache bent slow, lifting her with one arm. She pressed her face into his chest, sighing like she'd finally found rest. The widow's voice cracked. "Why do you let them?" He didn't answer. The boy rose next, stepping forward with tired eyes. He gripped the Apache's sleeve. "Papa," he murmured. The older girl followed, laying her head against his side. Then the smallest boy, clutching his coat, trembling but steady. All of them pressed to him, whispering the same word, again and again. The widow's throat ached. "Stop it. He's not—" Her words faltered. She turned, fists tight at her sides. "Why don't you tell them?" The Apache stayed still, children clinging to him, their whispers filling the room. His face didn't change, but his eyes carried something she couldn't name. The widow's voice broke softer. "Why do you accept it?" At last he spoke. His voice was deep, low, breaking through years of silence, because no man else ever did. The widow froze. The children went still, breath caught in their throats. The room held nothing but his words, echoing, heavy and final. Her eyes burned. "You carry that? All this time?" He didn't answer. The girl lifted her head. "You are, though," she whispered. "You are." The boy nodded. "We don't got another." The widow pressed her hands to her chest, fighting the weight in her throat. "You think you can be what they lost?" The Apache looked down at them, his arms full of children, their faces buried against him. His silence answered for him. The widow shook her head, tears slipping. "You don't know what it costs." He finally met her eyes. The look held more words than he'd ever spoken. The widow whispered, broken, "Maybe you do." The children clung tighter, repeating it again, whispers overlapping. "Papa, Papa, Papa." The widow turned away, pressing her palms against the table to steady herself. The fire in the hearth hissed low, the night pressing close against the windows. The boy's voice rose, trembling. "Will it come again?" The widow turned back, steady now. "Yes." The girl whispered, "What will we do?" The Apache's voice came rough, certain. "Stay." The children nodded, as if the word was enough. The widow sank into the chair, face in her hands. "This house can't hold forever." The Apache shifted the rifle against his shoulder. His silence spoke of readiness, of walls built not of wood, but of flesh, and bone, and will. The smallest girl looked up at him, eyes heavy. "You'll keep us?" He gave the smallest nod. The widow lifted her head. "And if you fall?" His gaze stayed steady on hers. She swallowed hard. "Then I will." The children pressed closer, all of them huddled against him now. The widow watched, chest tight, knowing she could not pull them away, even if she tried. The girl whispered again. "Papa." The widow's voice cracked. "He'll only say it once. Don't make him say it again." The children looked at her, puzzled. She held their gaze. "Silence is what kept him alive. Don't ask him to break it twice." They nodded, solemn. The word faded into the quiet, lingering but no longer spoken aloud. The Apache lowered his head, pressing his hand gentle to the top of the smallest girl's hair. His silence settled heavy, final, unshakable. The widow leaned back, eyes closing. Her voice came faint. "Then it's done. He's yours now, and you're his." The house breathed with them. The fire hissed. The night pressed close. The children's whispers faded to steady breath, their bodies slumping with exhaustion, clinging to him still. The widow whispered one last time, barely audible, because no man else ever did. The Apache's silence answered her, the only answer left, and it held forever.